Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines, where we take you behind the scenes to learn more about how the Post and Courier produces its journalism. I'm Mitch Pugh. I'm the executive editor here at the Post and Courier. I'm really excited today to be joined by reporter Jennifer Berry Hawes and photojournalist Gavin McIntyre. They're here to talk about really their nearly 2-year journey to create the Post and Courier's latest project, I Am Omar. And they're going to take a little bit behind the scenes and talk to you a little bit about their trip to Africa, the process that went into creating this really rich and detailed story. And I'm really excited to have them here. Before we get to Jennifer and Gavin, though, I want to remind everyone that after today's session, we'll be sending you a follow-up email. And in that email, there will be a recording of this session if you want to watch it later or share it with friends. There'll be more information, links to the story, some of the supporting material that was involved in creating this project, and contact information for Gavin and Jennifer if you have follow-up questions that you'd like to ask. For those of you that have experienced a Beyond the Headlines before, this one's going to be a little bit different. We're going to share some photos that Gavin and Jennifer took while they were on assignment in Africa. And we're going to talk through those photos and kind of go along that journey with them. And at the very end, we're going to share a video about this project that we think is really powerful. So hopefully, if you can't stick around for the whole show today, you can watch it on the recording that you receive in your email after we wrap up today. So, but let's start and with learning a little bit more about Jennifer and Gavin. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what your role here is with the Post and Courier and how it was that you got interested and involved in this particular project?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for doing this. I think it's a fascinating story. I am a reporter on the newspaper's Watchdog and Public Service team, which basically is a team that does some of our more in-depth journalism. We take sometimes a little longer to work on stories to produce things that have greater depth. And so that's how I came to be involved in Omar's story. We found out that Spoleto Festival USA was going to be commissioning an opera about his life and became interested in who he was. I have to say, I had never heard of Omar before this. And so at the newspaper, we started talking about doing something bigger and more in-depth about him, thinking that people also around the community didn't know who Omar was, and sat down with some of the Spoleto folks and hashed through what that might look like, and decided that, yeah, we were going to commit some resources and do something bigger about him.
Great. And I'll turn to Gavin next. One thing I'll say before I introduce Gavin, who's on our photojournalism team, is, one of the things I love about the projects that we do here is, and I'm not sure that always that readers understand, is that this is really, these really are collaborative stories between the reporter and writer and the photojournalists and everybody else involved in this project. So Gavin, you tell us a little about what your job is, but you got involved in this early on. So you've been working on this since the very beginning, and maybe talk a little bit through what attracted you to this project and why you were excited to work on it.
Yeah, so my name is Gavin McIntyre. I'm a photojournalist here at the Post and Courier. And so basically I cover daily assignments that I'm assigned to, but also longer form projects like this one with Omar. And I first found out about it, I think, in the fall of 2019 when my photo editor, Matthew Fortner, approached me about, working on an opera about Omar ibn Said. And so it was that first meeting. We sat down with our editors and Jennifer and representatives from Spoleto, and they just began kind of describing his story. And in that meeting was the first time I heard about him, and it immediately caught my interest, and I knew I wanted to be, a part of this project. And from there, we kind of discussing what else we could do and how we could really, transform the story into the project I hope everyone has seen so far.
Well, it's been quite a journey, I know, for both of you. As you mentioned, we first started talking about this in late 2019, very much pre-pandemic. And that certainly had an impact on the way the story developed. But let's start there before we jump into the photos. I know one of the things that people are always fascinated about is you guys were supposed to go to Africa way before you did, but you happened to be in the airport getting ready to get on a plane to go across the pond at a pretty ominous time. I don't know, Gavin, do you want to maybe start talking about that a little bit, what that was like, the first trip and what happened? Tell folks that story.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, our nerves were pretty good. I think we felt good about our trip. We were working with a professor over there, Mamaram Sek, who we went on the past trip this year. But so we felt pretty good. You know, we took the flight from Charleston to Atlanta, and the biggest thing at that point was me spilling coffee on myself, and I feel like I might have jinxed us too. I took a photo of me and Jennifer on the plane, excited, and put it on Instagram. And so I was just that might have like jinxed us a little bit. But yeah, we ended up at the food court in Atlanta International, pretty much an hour away from, getting on the plane when Jennifer starts to receive messages from her husband and immediate editor Glenn Smith about, did you see the announcement from Trump? And that's when Jennifer started like no, and starts looking through her phone.
Jennifer, you want to tell us what you were seeing?
The text I was seeing said something like, "Did you hear what President Trump just said?" And I said, "No," because I was on an airplane. And it turned out that was when Trump had delivered an address to the country saying that he was not going to allow people to come from Europe into the US because the pandemic was just beginning. And so we had about 20 minutes. I talked to Mitch, and we were having to make a very fast decision about whether to go to Senegal or not. We decided not to, which wound up being a blessing in disguise at the time. Didn't feel like it at the time, but we decided not to go, and it was good because in the end we wound up seeing some of our colleagues who were stranded at the airport in Paris where we had our layover, just in the middle of chaos. So it wound up being a good thing, but at the time it was a little nerve-wracking and stressful. But that extra year really gave us time to fine-tune our plans and bring some other people on board who wound up just being fantastic.
One of the things we should say here is, first of all, while the Post and Courier has definitely supported and supports this kind of work all the time, with the trip itself to Africa, we were able to secure funding from the Pulitzer Center. We told them about our story. They were very excited about it and wanted to help make sure that we could do it right and make that happen. But there were a lot of other people involved in helping make a trip like this and a mission like this possible. I don't know which one of you wants to address that, but can you talk a little bit about who all was involved and what it took to get to the point where you could make that trip to West Africa?
Well, maybe I'll jump in because I helped schedule some of it. We originally had Mamaram Sek as our main guide there outside of a driver who could translate for us. And Mamaram is a linguistics professor in Dakar who is wonderful. And he spoke French, and he also spoke Wolof, which is one of the main languages they speak in Senegal. But the extra year gave us time to find a man named Abdoulaye Gia who went with us. And Abdoulaye hails from Fouta. He has a lot of family there. He is also a descendant of one of the great sheikhs of the area. He also is an Arabic teacher, and so he could read Omar's writings himself and translate them instead of relying on other translations. And he spoke Pular, which is the local language mostly spoken in the area of Fouta where Omar was most likely from. So Abdoulaye turned out just to be an incredible asset to our trip. So it was Mamaram, Abdoulaye, of course, Gavin and I. We hired a driver. Mamaram had a driver from his university, and he also brought a graduate student who was French. And Senegal had been a French colony. So it was really interesting to have all of those cultures represented, languages represented, but also to have our bases really covered just logistically, how to get places. And without that crew, we would not have been able to go to some of these very remote ancient villages that we were able to go to.
So I think we're gonna call up photos here in just a second, but as we do, can one of you just kind of set this up really briefly? I know most people on the call have seen the story or read the story, but just a really kind of a brief summary of what the story was at this point as you were getting ready to head to Africa and what you were hoping to accomplish with the trip. I don't know, Gavin, do you want to take a stab at that one as we pull the photos up?
Yeah, I think we had some small goals, but we also had some big ones. I mean, Omar left very little details about his life in Senegal before he was captured, and taken to Charleston for enslavement. And so one, we just wanted to find out, where did he possibly come from? What was his, home? Did he have family, left behind in the Fututora region? Also, what was it like studying the Quran? I mean, he mentions that he studied for 25 years in the Futa and Bundu region. So it's just trying to get a sense of who he was, because a lot of the accounts on Omar are from, the Owen family members, or, people stopping to visit the Owens because they've heard about Omar. So those are a lot of the accounts that kind of make up, Omar's story up to this point, now that, so many people are doing their own research and really kind of like, telling the real story of Omar. But yeah, we're just trying to find out like who he was essentially.
Well, I think if we can get the photos up on the screen now, we'll start walking through that. So here's our first one. I don't know who wants to address it. So talk to us about where this is and where you were in your journey at this point.
So I think this is the second day of our trip when we landed in Senegal, and we wanted to start in Dakar and kind of like, we were working, but we wanted to start out slow before we really kind of hit the road, and we're kind of like going from place to place. So this is one morning where our hotel had a rooftop, and I really wanted to get visuals of, the city and the Atlantic Ocean from the hotel. And so this is just us waking up. I think it was probably around 6 a.m. or maybe even earlier, just trying to catch the light. And Jennifer was just sitting there. So I just took a photo to try to remember these kind of moments.
Yeah. I was spying on Gavin while he was working.
Now, neither one of you had ever been to Africa, is that correct?
No.
Yeah. Right, that's correct.
So waking up in a hotel in a place you've never been before, I would imagine was a pretty heady experience.
Yeah, and interestingly, we flew overnight. We just decided not to sleep. So we had, if I'm remembering this day correctly, we hadn't slept other than what we could on the plane. But Gavin was determined he was going to get the sunrise. And if you watch the video that he put together, you'll see a clip from the sunrise over some obviously urban buildings in downtown Dakar. And I believe that's from this moment. And it's a really beautiful shot.
That's great. Well, if we can go to the next photo, please. Tell us a little bit about what's happening here, because I think this is kind of getting into, as you guys started to do the research and really dig into the story.
Yeah, this is in a museum/library. One of the things we were trying to do was to see early on how much was recorded about slave voyages and people who were taken captive and removed from the country. And really, we found very little. It was interesting to see how few records remained with specifics. And that's been one of the real challenges for historians, trying to piece together, for instance, how many people from Senegal, of course, it wasn't called Senegal at the time, but how many people were taken from places like Futatoro. We just don't know that. And part of that is because the Europeans who came and went from the coast took their records with them or didn't keep them very well in the first place. And so this was early on, we were trying to figure out where we might go and also what kind of records were available.
Sure. Go to the next photo, that'd be great. What do we have here?
So we're in Dimont, and this was the first place that we went to on the Isle of Morphil, which is what Omar describes as his home. If you've read it, the land between two rivers. So this is between the Senegal and Douai River in the Futatoro region. And this was after we spoke with the Imam of Dimont, and I think Jennifer will be able to tell that story a lot better. But this moment was after a meeting with the Imam, and we're just kind of walking around. I was at the time attending the Quranic school they have there, where the students just sit on these mats, and just write out verses from the Quran on wooden tablets. And so this is kind of just sitting down and taking it all in and just talking with, members of the community there.
Yeah, this little girl was really cute. You can't see her in this picture, but she was with a friend of hers, and we couldn't speak to each other because at that moment the translators weren't around, and so she she and her friend wound up coming over to me, and they were very interested. I had one of those pens that you click on the end, and it was just really neat to see how curious they were about us. Obviously, we were very curious about their village and how life was there. And the Quranic school pictures that Gavin got are really great. I think we're going to see one now.
If we can go to the next photo, that'd be great.
Yeah, so this is the moment, and this is just, typical kid in class, essentially, just, joking around with a friend of his I think it was to my left, and then just laughing, as they're just writing verses from the Quran. And this was, kind of important because I think I mentioned earlier, Omar studied the Quran for 25 years. So trying to find out what that exactly meant to him and what it, looked like and what it still is in Senegal, because it plays such a role, in life over there. And even like in our group, I think everyone we traveled with was Muslim. And so that pretty much, surrounded our daily lives while we were traveling throughout Senegal.
One thing I'll add on this, the picture before, was that that's probably how Omar learned the Quran, was writing on this wooden tablets like this, and then rewriting them and washing them and rewriting them and chanting the verses. That's how many people learn the Quran, but also how they learn to write Arabic, which was something that obviously became critical for Omar later in his life. So it's kind of cool to see how exactly he might have learned it.
As you mentioned that, Jennifer, I will say I'll get some more questions later, but one of the questions we got ahead of the program was from Monica Driver. She wanted to know, do we know where Omar received his 25 years of education, or is that still something that's we're unsure of?
Yeah, we don't know for sure. He said that he learned in the Fouta and in the Bundu, which is an area to the south of Fouta. Fouta Toro is the area of Senegal that runs along the Senegal River to the north, near the border with Mauritania, and then the Bundus to the south of that. And unfortunately, we don't know how long he spent in each area or specifically where he went. He did write that one of his teachers was his brother. So it's possible that he spent some time in or near his home village. But unfortunately, we just don't know, and he didn't provide us any other details. It was one thing we really hoped to figure out, but he just didn't give enough specifics to really be certain.
Thank you. I think we can go to the next photo. What's going on here?
This is, on one of our many stops where we stopped in this place called Alwar, and this is the home of a descendant of Omar Fouta Tall, who is an important Islamic leader in Senegal, and especially in the Fouta Toro region. And so a professor we were traveling with, Mamran Sek, said, I think it would be important for us to sit down with the great grandson and have him look over Omar's writing, because that was something we wanted to do, because a lot of, research done on Omar's writing have been from, the US and, people who aren't from Fouta Toro region. So to get, people over there who have lived there and studied the Quran and, know Pular and the language, and who could be able to give more insight to what Omar was writing was essential. So this is, I think, the man's great grandson or grandson, and so he was just curious to what I was filming, and I was filming, his grandfather reading, Omar's autobiography. So it's just a nice moment I like to remember from the trip.
Yeah, that's great. So this is a photo that I certainly remember from as we were looking through the pictures, and it's such a great image. Where are we here, and at what stage of the trip were you at?
So this is taken in Kape, which becomes a key part of the story. And if you haven't read it, I don't want to give too much away, but I'm going to assume most people have read the story. And this was one place that we were directed that might be the place Omar wrote he was from. And when we went there, it was obviously extremely dusty. On some days, it's very dusty there because of the proximity to the Sahara Desert. And it really just made everything just have sort of this aura of mystique. And when we went to Kape, we met with the imam, and most of the village turned out to meet us, and we had lunch there, and the people were just incredibly hospitable and curious. They asked to keep Omar's writing so they could study him and his words more, which for us was really important. We really wanted to share what Omar wrote with people in Futa and leave it there so that they could have it to analyze and study themselves, long after we're gone. But when we went there, we were curious to see what they thought Omar wrote, and if he might have written Kape as the place that he was from.
What was it like in that kind of environment, Gavin, to take pictures? Because I know it's lighting is so important to what you all do. When you've got conditions like that, does it create unique challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely because that's not fog, that's dust from the Sahara Desert. So that was, in and of itself a challenge, kind of dealing with that and kind of working, to figure out the right color temperature, of how it should look, to me versus, what the camera's trying to do. And also just, because, essentially they didn't really, know us. So part of it was also just like sitting down with them and talking to them about why we're there. And, Mamaram and Abdullah did a great, amazing job, talking about our purpose and, what we're hoping to accomplish. And so everyone was so receptive and open. And actually the guy in the black jacket and black hat, I mean, we still communicate on WhatsApp every now and then. So everyone was very open and was like willing to talk about, their home and, the history, of the region with us.
That was one of the things I was wondering about. Because you guys, you show up there from Charleston in the United States, and you start asking about this guy that a lot of them hadn't heard of or didn't know. I mean, what was the reception like in general? And did you ever run into any issues where people were like, who are you to be asking about this?
I think the place that I felt it the most was in Kape, because when we met with the imam, he read the text and you could see his mind working to think, why are these Americans here asking about this man? And if he's from this village, and you could sense him thinking through what that would mean. Would that mean we were asking something of them? Were we trying to use them for a purpose? And, I thought it was really important for us to try to explain that what we were trying to do was find information about Omar and leave his writings there. And he was fine after we talked it through, but you could see his wheels turning. He wanted to know our purpose, and he also wanted to know if we just wanted him to say, whatever we had as a preconceived notion. And we were very adamant that we didn't, what his response wasn't important to us in the sense we wanted it to be A or B. What we wanted was for him to tell us what he really saw in the writing. And once he understood that and we could talk it through, he was fine. But I'd say outside of Kape, I don't remember really feeling that very much. What I felt more of was people were very interested to establish relationships with Charleston and South Carolina. They were aware of the historic connections with the slave trade. They wanted to know more about where we were from. They wanted to share information about their villages, but they were extremely interested in building ties between the countries, which I thought was really interesting.
Yes. Well, shall we move on to the next photo now? So where are you at here, Gavin, and what's happening?
So this is, I think, towards the end of our trip. We had just returned from the Futotora region, and we're staying at a hotel in San Luis. And this is, me and Jennifer went out to, kind of record ourselves and, record our thoughts about the trip so far. Cause, we were, getting so much information and processing, like emotions and the experience of what was happening. So we were recording ourselves. And so this is us on like one of the ledges, and that's the Atlantic Ocean, beside us. And so this is us just recording ourselves.
We did get a question from one of our audience members ahead of time, Bob Rayner, who wanted to know a little bit more about your visit to this port city and kind of what your experience was like there. I don't know if one of you wants to address that.
Well, jump in on one point is that San Luis is a port city that was controlled by the French for a lot of its earlier time. And it was likely the place where Omar was taken from, where he was put on a slave ship and brought to Charleston. So for us to go there was especially important to try to understand what that might have been like for him, and just to be in the place where he might have last seen his home country. So San Luis was really striking to me because it reminded me a lot of Charleston. It looks a lot like Charleston. The architecture, there has a lot of French architecture. It reminds me of the peninsula of Charleston. That was really, I was not expecting that. It was very interesting also to talk to people there about preserving those old buildings, because where in Charleston, there's a lot of interest in preserving them for their obvious physical beauty, but also because of the history. Whereas there's a huge debate as to whether to spend precious resources renovating and rehabbing buildings that have very traumatic histories for the people there. And I thought that was a really interesting debate. Do you preserve something because it's beautiful, but yet its legacy is ugly? And that's something that's still going on there today. That's a debate that's not been settled.
That's really interesting. Let's go to I think this is our last photo. And it's Jennifer taking some pictures, it looks like. Is this also toward the end then?
Yeah, this is I think our second to last day in Senegal, or third to last day. This is on Gorée Island, and when we're initially planning to go in 2020, I think we had scheduled to go like at the start of our trip. But I think after the year and talking about a lot more, we kind of decided to save it for the end, because this is essentially where if anyone knows Gorée Island, there's a lot of slave houses there, and this is one of them. I think Jennifer can correct me or not. I think this is the only one left, or one of the few left on Gorée Island. And so we had a guide giving us a tour and kind of taking us through essentially the process of what would happen when someone from the Senegal region was captured and then getting processed and essentially getting ready to taken to Charleston or wherever throughout the world. And so we saved that for last to after everything that we learned about Omar and saw, and then to go to the place where essentially that would be removed, or basically it didn't mean anything anymore. I think important to save that for the last part to really kind of put it all really into perspective.
Thank you. Well, I think we're gonna wrap up with some questions, both pre-submitted and that came in live in the Q&A function. If you see the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen and you're a participant in this, feel free to ask. It feels like an appropriate place, given what Gavin just said, to talk a little about the question that we got from Dave Hawes, who sent this in before the presentation today, and he wanted to know, did the experience that you had going to Africa, the things that you saw there and kind of took in working on this story, has that impacted the way now that you've come back to Charleston in South Carolina, how you view Charleston? I don't know who wants to start answering that, but I'll have both of you take a stab at that.
I don't know if it's affected my view of Charleston. I think throughout the research, something that caught my interest was, leading up to Omar getting captured and taken over here, there's a rush, because Omar's, sold, I think, a few days before the end of the slave trade, or he arrives right at the end, and there's a rush to, to basically, sell essentially as many people as possible and bring them over. And so that was something I didn't know before, that kind of caught my eye about, kind of like the city's like role and, how much like the city operated, off of the slave trade.
Jennifer, for you, has it changed anything for you? You mentioned the similarities in between those two cities, but I mean, what else kind of stuck out to you as coming back?
I think along those same lines is the connections between Charleston and Senegal were so obvious when we went to me. And just as one example, we were driving, we did a lot of driving, and we were driving along at one point, we passed a series of women selling baskets in a roadside stand, actually in several roadside stands, one after another. And we stopped and we're looking at them, and the baskets were remarkably like the baskets that the basket ladies here in the Low Country make. They look extremely similar, other than some of the materials being different. And just as one example, obviously something that was brought here by people who were enslaved from that region. Another one is the large amount of rice plantations. There's a lot of rice growing that goes on along the river. And interesting side note on that is that when we went and took a closer look at one, the support, there was a big sign in the rice fields that said something along the lines of "Thank you for your support, China," that it was funded by China and not by the United States or specifically South Carolina, that those connections were going in a whole other direction. When, to me, everywhere we went, you could see stronger connections between Senegal and the US because of the history of the slave trade that, going back to what I said earlier, would be really interesting to try to promote those relationships. And I'd love for Gavin to tell you a story about when we met the director of the Museum of Black Civilization and his thoughts on Africa and West Africa specifically its relationships with the diaspora.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of our, and I think our second day there, we went to the Museum of Black Civilization and spoke with the director. And he talked about how, African Americans in the US have always tried to have a conversation with the diaspora in Africa, but it hasn't really been a mutual conversation. And so the museum is trying to work on that through exhibits and other ways. So I'm interested to see, where that goes, but hopefully, Omar is, a little like that conversation happening because, we're working with, professors in Senegal to tell the story.
One of the questions that came in on the live chat was very much in that vein, asking, I think it's Therese Shelton wanted to know, what can you see us doing, or each side doing to build that relationship between Charleston and Senegal and the people that you met there? What might that look like?
I think there's a lot of opportunities, and some are small ones. For instance, when we were in Kape, one of the older men came up to us and said, "We love to build relationships with your country." And he said something along the lines of, "We have all of our basic needs met here." And this is a village that has some solar power and some well water, but certainly not the things we would think of here, in Charleston as being comforts of life. And he said, "We have our basic needs met, but the women here still grind the millet by hand." Millet is a grain that is commonly grown in the area. And essentially, could you help us get a millet grinding machine? And I thought, what a simple thing that could fill a lot of need that somebody from this area could help provide. And then more broadly, culturally, I think creating connections with places like the Museum of Black Civilization in Dakar would be great, because a lot of the cultural, a lot of people like Mam Ramsek, who have active roles in cultural institutions there, could help provide those connections. So I think connecting people like Mam Ram with people here in Charleston would be a really great first step to see what we can do.
Well, I know that the new director of the International African American Museum was at our event the other night. And it seems like those, that's a natural tie to, the folks that you met over there. And I don't know if you've had any conversations with them, but it seems like an opportunity to reach out there. But
the connection.
Yeah.
Mamra and them.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. One of the questions that I'm going to try to make sure I'm asking this properly came in on the live chat from Michael, wanting to know, obviously you had a lot of Black Muslims in Africa that you worked with and here to make this happen. How did you forge those relationships, and how did you navigate that? You sort of like, I don't want to say necessarily you needed to ask permission to tell the story, but you certainly wanted to have them understand and be part of that process so that it the way we told this story was as authentic as possible.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I wasn't the one that initially connected with Mamram, but it was through Spoleto, if I'm correct, where we met Mamram and made that connection. And he was himself doing his own, research on Omar, and coming out with, his own article, I believe, on him eventually. And so I think we forged our bond just out of just an interest on knowing more about Omar and discovering who he is and what his life was.
And also just being respectful of the customs you saw. I mean, I have no problem wearing, covering my hair while I was there, because there were areas there that are very conservative. And I think basic respect for people's customs and what makes them comfortable is important. And Gavin can tell the story, but there was a moment when he was invited to go into one of the mosques, which was very difficult to do. And I think the way he handled it was extremely thoughtful and professional. And then people see you acting that way, and that you're not there just to, get in their face with a camera or a notebook, and you just build a relationship from there. I don't, Gavin, you want to tell them about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the moments that I was able to get with my camera were, those weren't, for the most part, weren't like immediate. It was a lot of, talking and just going over who we were, and what we were trying to accomplish. So that moment of going to mosque, that was something I was hoping to do. And so we were in Orfande, and we got there for the Friday prayer service. And so we were hoping, I was hoping to attend. And so the imam was very kind and said, yes, you can attend. You can just, sit in the back and just don't record during the prayer. And I said, that's no problem. So I had Abdullah helped me kind of get situated, but, I don't speak Arabic. And so I don't have a clear understanding of when exactly the prayer is happening. And so, I started beginning to, record with my camera, but then I would hear Arabic. And so I'm not sure if that's the prayer or not. So I would just, turn off my camera and just be like, and this kind of happened a little bit for a few more minutes. And then eventually, like, the prayer actually started, I understood, but it was just being very, trying respectful, because, we are guests, they're welcoming us and, taking, sometimes hours to sit down and talk with us. And so I think that went a long way with kind of building connections with people there.
That's great. Well, I know we're past the half hour that we promised. I figured we'd run a little late with all of the great photos and things that you guys shared today. I really appreciate both of you taking your time. If you haven't read the project yet and haven't seen it, obviously postandcourier.com/Omar is where you can find that. There's the main story, a lot of a great video from Gavin, some maps, some other interactive pieces to really help you understand this journey. Again, as we said at the start, we'll be sending an email out to everyone once this is concluded. It'll have links to the project, contact information for Gavin and Jen if you have more questions, a link to this video, etc. So you certainly keep an eye out for that. As always, if you're not a subscriber, we would love to have your support as a subscriber. You can do that at postandcourier.com/subscribe. Or if you're not ready for subscription yet or already a subscriber, we also, projects like this, we are fortunate enough to get funding from places like the Pulitzer Center, but we also have our own public service and investigative fund that helps support, in-depth journalism that requires expenses like traveling overseas or spending just, the sheer amount of time that Jennifer and Gavin spent on this researching and preparing for this trip. That those things are not cheap, and so that we are thankful that we have so many great donors that have given to that fund. If you're interested in that, you can find more information at postandcourier.com/donate. So again, keep an eye out for that email. We'll have the recording of this presentation, a lot of other material in there. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And we're going to wrap things up with a video that we did about this project. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you'll take a look for your email. And If you're already a subscriber or donor, thank you for your support. We deeply appreciate it. We can't do work like this without you. So thank you and have a great afternoon.
Gavin and I went to Senegal to explore the story of Omar ibn Said, a man who was captured there probably around 1807 and brought to Charleston and enslaved here.
I was immediately like, I wanted to be a part of this. It just sounded like an interesting story that I never heard about. Visually, it was also a challenge. How do you tell a story of someone who left very little information about themselves? And so I thought it was like a unique opportunity to really kind of approach this in a different way.
Omar's writing is historic for a number of reasons. First, he wrote the only known surviving autobiography that was written by someone still enslaved in Arabic. And given that upwards of 1 in 5 African captives was Muslim, the fact that that's the only one we have really speaks to so much faith and story that was lost. For us, the story began when Spoleto Festival USA commissioned an opera about Omar's life. It made us really wonder who he was and what his story was, and we wanted to explore what he was really trying to say in his writing.
Before he got here, he was 37, and he had lived so much of a life before he was captured in Senegal and taken over here. Now he had this new identity that he kind of had to live with and kind of like resist. And so, it's important to like raise that to readers who will see the stories about this man who was taken over here and how he had to find a way to survive.
It's one thing to try to understand Omar from the United States, but it's a whole other thing to understand Omar from where he grew up and where his family was and where his identity was really molded. It's just not something that normally at a local newspaper you're able to do.
He left very little information about his life in Senegal, and even here it was like hard to find information. So especially trying to go to Senegal and retrace it, we really had to work with researchers over there. We're not only going to Dakar, the capital, we're going 8 or 9 hours inland to a completely different part of the country. And so we really had to know what we were working on and really know what we were trying to do there.
Gavin and I spent a lot of time doing research that's not visible in the story, going through historical newspapers, going to museums, going through various archives here and also in Senegal. Historical work like that is really time-consuming, and you often don't find anything.
What's really cool about the Post and Courier is that they were committed to not only looking at this locally, but internationally, and going across state lines to North Carolina and overseas to Senegal to tell the story about Omar.
These kind of stories cannot be done quickly. They're not stories you can turn around in a day, sometimes even a week, sometimes months. We were able to go to Senegal because of a grant from the Pulitzer Center, which paid for us to go and travel around the country to explore Omar's story and also to explore how slavery is viewed in West Africa as opposed to how we study it and view it and grapple with it here in the US. So we're really thankful to donors who make it possible so that the Post and Courier is able to continue doing this kind of deep reporting.
And we thank our subscribers for their support of local journalism, because without them, we wouldn't be able to do these stories.
Omar's story is really special and unique and interesting, but more broadly, it's part of the historical record. His writing is so important, and his recollections of his life are critical to understanding that time period, and to be able to do that story justice was important to us. It's a wonderful team, and I think you'll see in the result that many people's creative energies went into it, and all for the benefit of Omar's story.